This is the brand new Factor 1 and it might be one of the craziest looking aero bikes ever made.
I'm going to share 5 key things you need to know about this bike, and the first is this insanely narrow head tube.
The question I'm sure you are all asking is, how does it work? Well, rather than having a traditional head tube that the fork sits at the bottom of and then has a steerer tube that extends up through the middle, the Factor 1 uses a bayonet fitting. The fork itself makes up the leading edge of the bike and all of the steering happens behind it. 2 bearings sit inside the frame and a metal bar runs from the bottom to the top, which connects it all together. It means that the head tube can be super narrow and to my eye looks as though it could be just over an inch wide. This design has resulted in a unique situation where the leading edge of what is usually the head tube will always be pointing in the direction that you're steering, similar to the Colnago Y1Rs and the Cervelo S5. Since there is no conventional stem and handlebar setup, the handlebars on the Factor 1 are effectively linked directly to the forks, but that said, there is still some adjustability. You can opt for handlebars with a higher rise of 20mm, and you can add between 5 and 15mm of spacers underneath the handlebars. Since this bike has to be UCI compliant, the bars are 38cm wide at the tops, but it is a different story for the stem. Since there is no stem, Factor had to come up with a new sizing system which simply goes from 1 to 5, with each number representing an increasingly larger effective stem length. These lengths might seem quite long. For most bikes, a 110mm stem would be on the larger size. However, the Factor 1 has been designed to place the rider in an altogether more aggressive position, putting them much further forwards over the bars. Factor has been clocking on to modern race bike trends such as shorter cranks, saddles moving forwards, narrow handlebars and extended reaches. The latter has been looked after by the new cockpit setup. The key thing Factor wanted to achieve here was to create that long, racy, stretched out position without the downside of running a super long stem, since that usually comes along with slow handling and a numb feeling bike. The shorter cranks and forward position saddle required some different treatment though. So, bottom bracket height has dropped by 5mm to maintain the rider's centre of gravity and accommodate for those shorter cranks. On the other hand, the seat post has an adjustable head which offers a variable seat tube angle of 73.5 to 77 degrees. Factor claims the one has effective fit parity with the Ostro VAM and that riders familiar with our flagship race bike will find their core coordinates unchanged. I'm yet to ride the bike, but I'm going to guess that while on paper it can be argued that the one has effective fit parity with the Ostro VAM, I reckon in reality the bike will feel totally different. Your core coordinates might be unchanged, but I bet everything else will make it feel like a very different beast to ride. Since this new bike does look pretty otherworldly, the question has to be asked, who's it for? Is there a decent commercial reason for creating a bike that only really serves those who are being paid to ride it? Well, whether or not it makes any commercial sense at all, I do have to give Factor credit here because it has freely expressed that this bike is for only a select group of riders. Those being either competitive riders at elite or serious amateur levels or non-professional performance enthusiasts. In the press release, Factor goes so far as to say that the one is not for riders who are resistant to change, or for those who prioritise comfort, or for those who care more about saving weight than they do gaining an aerodynamic advantage, or is it for those who are cost conscious? So let's get into it. How much does the Factor 1 cost? Full build prices start at £10,899 here in the UK for an Ultegra Spec bike and can go up to over £14,000 for a Campagnolo Super Record build. However, frame sets and rolling chassis are available too. And if you're wondering how those prices stack up against the Ostrovam, then take a look at these comparative prices. Clearly, there is an increase in cost compared to the Ostrovam, but at this end of the market, I wonder how many people will actually be fussed by an extra £1,000 or £2,000 if it means that they can get a One. It was funny. I filmed the One at a factor showroom in Silverstone, meaning I was completely surrounded by other factors. And after looking at the One for a couple of hours and then looking at the Ostrovam, it instantly looked so old and outdated. I reckon that the futuristic shapes and curves of the One will lure in a lot of people and will become an incredibly easy upsell for those who were originally considering the Ostrovam. My prediction is that eventually the Ostrovam will be discontinued and the Monza, Factor's more affordable and slightly less aggressive race bike, will come into its own. Right now, there is so much crossover between the three models, but by removing the Ostrovam in the middle, the range becomes easier to sell and arguably better for consumers, since the Monza is better for more people. Of course, as I will always say, and it really matters in this case, but make sure you get a bike fit before you buy a bike. Do not buy the One just because it looks cool. It genuinely will only be right for those who have the flexibility to ride it. In case you're wondering about any other top-line specifications, then the One has clearance for 34mm tyres, is optimised for crank lengths between 165 and 170mm, and it's only compatible with flat mount disc brakes and electronic group sets. It's claimed to be 8% faster than the Ostrovam, around 15% quicker than the 2024 Cervelo S5, and 22% faster than the specialised tarmac SL8. Looking at the One as a whole bike, you can see design cues from a handful of other bikes that are out there. The head tube and the cockpit area gives me a little bit of Colnago Y1Rs. The forks give me a little bit of Hope Olympic track bike and even the Lotus Type 136. And the rear of the bike gives me a lot of Cervelo S5. The blending together of all of these different elements has resulted in a bike which is beautifully unique, but also slightly Frankenstein-y. I did manage to get this bike on the scales, and it did surprise me when it clocked in at around 7.3 kilos. But a word of caution, that weight did come from a set of Park Tools scales, so take that number with a fistful of salt. It's clear that more aero bikes will start to look like the Cervelo S5, the Y1Rs, and now the Factor One. These are the bikes that are setting the standard for what the future of aero road bikes will be. I think that very quickly, all of the others will start to look very outdated. I'm going to try my best to get my hands on a new Factor One to see what it actually feels like to ride in the real world, but that's undoubtedly going to be quite a tough job. So let me know what you think of the Factor One down below, or if you have any questions about it.